There's a word that shows up constantly in the reporting from June 2026 about the Iran war. The word is ceasefire. It shows up in press conferences. It shows up in presidential statements. It shows up in diplomatic cables. Secretary of State Marco Rubio used it 3 times in front of a House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing on June 3rd. Trump used it on the phone with reporters on the White House lawn. And at the exact moment those words were being spoken, an Iranian drone was burning through the roof of a passenger terminal at Kuwait International Airport. 1 person was dead. Dozens were wounded. The terminal building, the one where families line up at check-in counters, where there are coffee shops and duty-free stores and children falling asleep in their parents' arms before a flight, was heavily damaged. Kuwait shut its airspace entirely. And somewhere in Washington, a speechwriter was drafting talking points explaining why this was consistent with an ongoing ceasefire. I want to tell you about the 48 hours that led to that airport. Not because the airport is the most important thing that happened, it's not, but because it's the most visible thing. The thing you can see in a photograph. The civilian terminal with a hole in the roof, the ambulances outside, the smoke. Everything else in these 48 hours happened in the dark, or in the Strait, or in rooms where journalists aren't allowed. The airport is where you can see what the war actually is, as opposed to what the statements say it is. Let's go back to June 2nd, specifically to a moment that barely made international headlines because it happened in the middle of the night Gulf Standard Time, and the rest of the world was already numb to the cadence of this conflict. A Botswana-flagged oil tanker, registry Botswana, cargo unknown, ownership structure buried under 4 layers of shell companies in jurisdictions the Treasury Department has been trying to untangle for 3 months, was moving through the Strait of Hormuz when a U.S. military aircraft locked onto it and fired a single AGM-114 Hellfire missile. The missile hit. The tanker didn't sink. The Hellfire is an anti-armor precision munition, not a ship-killing weapon. But its engine room was disabled, its propulsion was gone, and the vessel was left dead in the water in the most strategically sensitive shipping lane on the planet. CENTCOM released a 4-line press statement. The tanker, it said, had been confirmed to be operating in support of Iranian efforts to evade the U.S. naval blockade. The strike was authorized. The crew was unharmed. The vessel was being monitored. What the press statement did not include, what it never includes, is the chain of consequences that a single Hellfire missile in the Strait of Hormuz can generate when the other side is watching, calculating, and waiting for exactly this kind of provocation to justify the next move on their own list. Iran had been building a response for 2 days. Not to the tanker specifically, the tanker was just the trigger they chose to use. The response had been in preparation since the May 7th strikes, when U.S. aircraft hit Qeshm Island, Bandar Abbas, Bandar Kamir, Sirik, and Manab in what Trump called a love tap. The IRGC Aerospace Force doesn't process a strike on 5 of its installations as a love tap. It processes it as a debt. And on June 3rd, it tried to collect. At approximately 0300 hours Kuwait Standard Time. On June 3rd, radar operators at Kuwait's Air Defense Command detected multiple inbound contacts from the northwest. Low altitude, slow moving. Signature consistent with Shahed series loitering munitions, the one-way attack drone that has become, over the course of this war, Iran's most used instrument of harassment, disruption, and symbolic punishment. The Kuwaiti Air Force scrambled intercept aircraft. Air defense batteries activated. Some of the drones were shot down. The numbers vary in the initial reporting. The Kuwaiti military has not released a full accounting of how many were launched versus how many were intercepted, which is itself information. At least one got through. It hit Terminal 2 of Kuwait International Airport at a time when the terminal had overnight cleaning crews, cargo handlers on the early shift, and a handful of transit passengers who had been sleeping in the seats near their gates waiting for connecting flights. 1 person died. The airport has not released the victim's identity. Dozens were wounded. The terminal's structural damage was described by Kuwaiti civil aviation authorities as severe enough to require indefinite closure. All commercial flights in and out of Kuwait City were suspended. By morning, Kuwait's foreign ministry had summoned the Iranian charge d'affaires. The Gulf Cooperation Council issued a statement. The Arab League issued a statement. Turkey issued a statement. The International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, the UN body that governs global air travel, issued a statement noting that deliberately targeting civilian aviation infrastructure constitutes a violation of international law. Iran's IRGC, meanwhile, issued its own statement. It said it had targeted a U.S. logistics hub that was supporting American military operations in the region. It named Kuwait International Airport specifically. It called the strike a precision operation against military assets. Kuwait International Airport is one of the busiest civilian airports in the Gulf. It handled over 16 million passengers in 2024. It has an IATA code, a McDonald's in the departures hall, and a duty-free shop that sells perfume. Iran called it a military logistics hub. And here is where the war becomes something more disorienting than any tactical situation, because both statements contain a kernel of something true. The U.S. has been using Kuwait as a logistics node for coalition operations. U.S. military aircraft have transited through Kuwaiti airspace. The camp near Kuwait City that houses American service members, Camp Arifjan, is a real place with real American soldiers. The airport, in a theater of war where everything is dual use because everything is connected, does serve a military logistical function alongside its civilian one, which is exactly how Iran justifies the strike, and exactly why the strike is still what it is. A drone flying into a building where cleaning crews were mopping floors and transit passengers were trying to sleep. Do you think striking a civilian airport, even one used for military logistics, is a war crime? Comment 1. If yes. Comment 2. If Iran's reasoning changes the calculation for you. By midday on June 3rd, the back and forth was running at the pace of a social media argument, except with weapons. Iran's Navy claimed it had also targeted a US CENTCOM facility in Kuwait with additional strikes that morning. CENTCOM denied this, saying no US facilities had been damaged. Iranian state television ran footage of what it said was a burning American installation. US officials said the footage showed a different location. The international community had no reliable way to verify either claim in real time. At the same time, Iranian forces separately claimed to have targeted a vessel near the Strait of Hormuz for what they called a Hormuz rules violation. The US denied any American vessel had been damaged. It was not clear whether this was a separate incident from the June 2nd tanker disablement, a response to it, or a fabrication intended to create a picture of symmetry. We fired, they fired. Neither side escalated beyond what was proportionate, a narrative that serves the diplomatic track even as the military track burns civilian airports. And then Trump spoke. Things are going very well, he told reporters. The ceasefire is very much in place. Negotiations have gone very well. He added separately that Iran had agreed in principle to allow the United States to access sites inside Iran to dig up buried nuclear material, which, if true, would be a diplomatic development of extraordinary significance. He did not provide details. The State Department did not immediately confirm the comment. Iran did not confirm the comment. What Trump confirmed in those same remarks was that the U.S. naval blockade of Iran's ports remained in place and was, in his words, the most powerful thing the United States was doing. More powerful, he suggested, than the military strikes. The port of Bandar Abbas had been under naval blockade. The port of Chabahar had been under naval blockade. Iranian exports by sea had been reduced by, in some assessments, over 90% from pre-war levels. The Iranian economy, already under severe pressure from a decade of sanctions, was now experiencing supply disruptions that were showing up in food prices, in medicine availability, in the kinds of shortages that don't make the news but reshape the daily life of 20 million people who had no vote in whether their government fired missiles at Kuwait's airport. The blockade was working, which is why Iran was firing drones at airports and tankers and CENTCOM facilities and anywhere else that created visible, photographable proof of capability. Here's what gets lost in the statement and counterclaim cycle of a conflict like this one. Kuwait had nothing to do with launching Operation Epic Fury. Kuwait is not a belligerent in this war. Kuwait opened its territory to American logistical transit because the U.S. is Kuwait's security guarantor, and refusing that request carries its own risks. Kuwait did not choose to be at the intersection of a U.S.-Iran conflict. Kuwait's government, its citizens, and the person who died cleaning a terminal at 3 a.m. did not make any of the decisions that led to a drone flying through the roof of their airport. This is not a small thing to note in passing. It is the central moral fact of what June 3rd actually was. Wars propagate. That's the right word. They propagate, like a signal moving through a medium, reaching surfaces that had no involvement in the original transmission. Kuwait is one of those surfaces. The UAE was one in May when a drone hit Fujairah. The shipping crew stuck in the Persian Gulf, 23,000 of them from 87 countries, according to CENTCOM's own figure. Are those surfaces? The passengers who were trying to sleep in Kuwait's Terminal 2 were those surfaces. The US Navy is fighting Iran in the Strait of Hormuz. Every surface in a 1,000-mile radius is paying the cost of that fight, whether they consented to it or not. By the end of June 3rd, the tactical picture had not fundamentally changed. The U.S. naval blockade remained in place. The Strait of Hormuz remained contested. Contested meaning that military vessels can transit it under force protection, but commercial shipping companies are still not sending their crews into a corridor where Iranian drones are flying at airports and American Hellfire missiles are hitting tankers with no advance notice. Operation Southern Spear, the parallel anti-narco-trafficking campaign in the Eastern Pacific that CENTCOM has been running simultaneously with all of this, launched its fourth strike of the week on May 30th, killing 3 people on a vessel off the coast of Central America because that campaign simply never stopped while the entire United States military apparatus was focused on the Strait of Hormuz. The same week, 4 more strikes, 205 people killed since September. CENTCOM released a 14-second video. The world barely noticed. The U.S. is currently fighting or conducting lethal operations against in the Strait of Hormuz, in the Persian Gulf, in the Gulf of Oman, in the Red Sea with Houthi forces, in Iraq with Iranian-backed militia groups, in Syria with remnant ISIS elements, and in the Eastern Pacific with narco-trafficking organizations, simultaneously, with one military. The ceasefire, Trump says, is very much in place. Kuwait's airport is still closed. The cleaning crew's shift ended before the drone arrived. Some of them made it home, some of them didn't. The terminal that needed cleaning is now a crime scene, or a war zone, or a military target, depending on which statement you choose to believe. One person is dead. The airport has not released their name. Somewhere in Kuwait City, there is a family that is not waiting for a statement from any government about what to call the place where their person died. They already know what to call it. What do you think a ceasefire actually means in a war where both sides keep fighting? Is this diplomacy working, or is ceasefire just a word that buys time for the next strike? Leave your answer in the comments, because the next file we're unlocking covers what Iran agreed to let the United States do inside its borders. And if the reports are right, it's the most significant concession in this entire conflict. The sensors are hot. The board is set. See you on the next mission.